Good morning to you. So, Matt, we'll start with you. Cabinet's National Security to reportedly meet today and discuss those final details of a planned repatriation of women and children from Syria to Australia. So, is it all systems go?
Well, Cabinet's considering, the subcommittee of Cabinet will be considering it today. It's known that there are a number of Australian citizen women and children in refugee camps in the Middle East. And from what I understand, Pete, ASIO and the Australian Federal Police have developed a plan to return them safely to Australia. But I want to reassure people that if it does occur, that it will be done on national security grounds, and the safety of Australian citizens and the Australian people will be paramount in this. But again, it's being considered by Cabinet this afternoon. A decision has not been made, and it's on the advice of our security and intelligence agencies.
OK, Holly, so just a consideration at this stage. Do you support it?
Look, no, I think it's an incredibly risky move. It doesn't sound like a very secret plan to me. It seems like it's all over the papers today. It's important that all Australians are protected, and a lot's being made about the women that are over in these camps. These women went willingly. They knew what they were doing. They were going to support ISIS and those that were fighting for it. I think there are grave concerns around the radicalisation of these people and their children. Those camps in northern Syria are known. Yes, they're known to be violent, but they're also known to still be hotbeds for radicalisation. So there are very, very big risks to the Australian population and Australian communities should some of these people come back. There's also the huge expense with regards to some of the community monitoring that's being looked at. A lot of these women will face charges when they come back because they did enter into zones which were not allowed to be entered into by Australians at the time under what was known as ISIS areas. So there's going to be those sorts of complications because there are jail terms attached to some of these criminal charges that these women will face. So I think there's a lot to be considered here. It needs to be done very, very carefully. And it shouldn't be seen as sort of this warm and fuzzy, let's bring everyone back with a big hug and it'll all be okay, because these are some people who've been radicalised against everything the Australian community believes in and stands for.
Matt, is there any way to guarantee that they don't pose a risk to the community?
Well, Pete, the previous government, the Liberal government, spent a lot of time acting on the advice of ASIO and the Australian Federal Police and putting in place policies with the support of the then opposition Labor Party at the time around countering violent extremism in Australia and abroad. And that was done on the advice of those agencies. And those policies are in place. And you would think that those policies will be utilised in circumstances such as this. So these were policies that were put in place by the previous government with the support of the Labor Party at the time. But again, I make the point that this is a decision that hasn't been made yet. It's being considered by Cabinet this afternoon, and those proper Cabinet processes must be given the opportunity to take place. And again, it's on the advice of the Australian security agencies, ensuring the safety of the Australian people.
Holly, the women have already reportedly said that they will voluntarily submit to monitoring, they'll wear ankle bracelets, etc. Is that enough to assuage your concerns?
Well, but we're also talking about the children coming back, and children are up to 18 years of age, and we don't know what the ages of these children are. And certainly if you've spent any time in the Middle East, you know that these children, from 12 years and older are being used as part of the radicalisation, are being used in insurgencies and to attack communities over there, and that was throughout we saw in those sort of conflicts in Syria. We know there's been a conflict between Syria and Lebanon with Hamas only recently, and the use of children is not new over in the Middle East, and we don't know the ages of these children. We're not talking about 6-month-old babies or perhaps 2-year-olds across the board here. We're talking about children that are old enough to have been attending schools over there that potentially have the ability to already, or possibility of already being radicalised. So it's entering into very dangerous territory, and the government is responsible for protecting all Australians, keeping all Australians safe. So it might be one thing for the mother to be monitored. What's going to happen to the children, and the children who are not, we're not talking about toddlers.
We've got to move on. Report this morning, Matt, in the AFR, that your government is canvassing options at this stage to wind back stage 3 tax cuts. Are you about to break an election promise?
No, Pete. We were very clear at the election that we support the stage 3 tax cuts being implemented. That was an election commitment, and we intend to meet that election commitment. I think it's also important to point out that these tax cuts don't come into effect until 1st of July 2024. So they're some way off.
Is there a bit of surgery, though? Are you going to change it somehow?
There's no plans to change them. We need to, obviously, there's a fair bit of time between now and 2024. We've got the inflation challenges that the economy has at the moment, and getting cost of living pressures down for Australian families, pensioners. They're the priorities for this government. We delivered some of those commitments recently in the Parliament that came out of the Jobs and Skills Summit. So our policy and our approach will be reducing cost of living pressures. OK,
so as things stand at the moment, the tax cuts, stage 3 tax cuts, will go ahead?
Yes, that's correct.
OK. Holly, times have changed. Just taking an alternative view at the moment. The RBA about to jack up rates again today. Debt's getting more expensive to service. Is this something that the government should consider doing, i.e. canvassing whether or not they should go ahead or not?
No, and definitely not. This was an election promise. The Labor Party has time and again said that they're going to keep those stage 3 tax cuts. It does feel in the Parliament and the Senate last week that they were starting to soften up the ground to move away from it. And I guess we've got 3 weeks to see whether or not this is an election promise that will be broken within the first 6 months of this government. On the 25th of October, the budget will be handed down. It does seem like Treasurer Chalmers is trying to sort of soften the ground up and put some feelers out about that. Absolutely, these need to be maintained. Yes, it's July 1, 2024, but it is about making sure that those plans that people had, the futures that they have been banking on, and at the moment they're going to have pressures where our mortgage rate increases that no one was expecting to start to see these mortgage rate increases at such a significant and fast rate. On top of the cost of living pressures, the Australian economy is going to come under a lot of pressure, but it is important that people have security when the forward planning was already sort of put in place. It's legislated. They'd have to walk away from an election commitment. OK, Matt, a quick one here on the Republic while I've got you. Craig Foster firming up apparently as a potential replacement for Peter Fitzsimons as the chairman of the Australian Republic movement. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Peter Fitzsimons is moving on, and I want to pay tribute to Peter for the great work that he's done over the last 7 years as the chair of the ARM. He certainly put the issue of an Australian head of state back on the agenda in Australia. He's boosted the membership of the organisation, and they're in a strong position at the moment. Who they choose as their chair is a matter for them, and whoever it is, I look forward to working with them.
And a quick one here, who should be on the $5 note?
Well, that's a matter that the government is considering. The default position is that the sovereign remains on the $5 note, but as you know, we're not going to immediately change circulation of the $5 note. The Queen will remain on the $5 note for some time until those notes are due for replacement, and that's going to take somewhere between 4 to 5 years. So the sovereign will remain on the $5 note for the moment. OK, and it's the King for you, Holly?
Absolutely, it should remain the sovereign. It's now King Charles III, and he should be on the $5 note.
Matt and Holly, appreciate your time this morning as always. Thank you. We'll talk to you again soon. Well, on that note, coming up, King Charles.